When the Americans entered Iwo Jima, they never expected the onslaught they'd come to face. The Japanese weren't just dug into trenches, but had sophisticated underground tunnels that made them almost impervious to strikes from the sky. So, the United States had to come up with a new plan, one that would require 335 special flamethrower operators, of whom only 18 would return. This wasn't just a war strategy, but a suicide mission, with a casualty rate that was incomprehensible to the men who survived, and a life expectancy of just 4 minutes on the battlefield. Yet one man returned and received a Medal of Honor for his efforts.
I was issued a flamethrower. My job was, of course, to knock out pillboxes, burn them out.
But why did 92% of flamethrower operators never return from Iwo Jima? And was it even worth it for those who sacrificed their lives for the cause? Carved out of volcanic rock and nestled between the Japanese mainland and the Mariana Islands is the small island known as Iwo Jima. It's just about 8 square miles in size, but it served a critical role by the end of the Second World War. You see, Iwo Jima was right along the flight path of US aircraft. More specifically, the B-29 superfortress used to pummel the Japanese mainland with continuous bombing raids.
Guided by our navigators, we began the long hop across the Yellow Sea.
Yet the longer range of these bombers, and a large swath of unfriendly territory off the coast of Japan, would mean that the B-29 had to fly by itself from the Mariana Islands. Unfortunately, this didn't prove effective, with many of them being met by Japanese interceptors. The US lost about 414 of these bombers over and around Japan, proving to be costly and forcing US generals to come up with a new plan, something that would bring them closer to the mainland and allow for escort fighters to accompany each bomber.
Iwo Jima lie in the way, in the path of Saipan, our B-52, B-52.
Bombers?
Right? Yeah, 52s were there. The B-29s were there, and they went direct flights there to Tokyo, dropped their bombs, and had to get back to Saipan. From Saipan, could not travel that far. They ran out of fuel.
But the Japanese were aware of this, moving from traditional trenches and pillboxes underground. In essence, the Japanese would listen for the sound of bombers, dive underground, only to re-emerge once the raids were done. The US Army had to invade if they were to take this strategic location, but it wasn't going to be easy. By February 19, 1945, the United States decided that invading Iwo Jima was the only option, and the only way to get there was by ship. In fact, initial battle assessments proved the invasion to be fruitful, allowing US forces to comfortably take the island, especially with pre-bombardment raids and naval artillery raining hell down on Japanese forces. Yet the moment Marines set foot on the island, it became a slaughterhouse. The Japanese were deeply entrenched with massive ammunition storage and strategic positions that made every square mile feel like a possible ambush. Thanks to the Japanese defenses, the US quickly realized that shelling was futile. The volcanic ash became quicksand, immobilizing vehicles, while the open terrain left almost no place to hide. In fact, just 1 hour after arriving, there was utter silence. Not a single Japanese shot was fired until the beaches were packed with thousands of US Marines. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi then gave the order. Machine gun fire erupted, closely followed by artillery fire, turning the water on the beaches from blue to red as the blood flowed back into the ocean. As remarked by Robert Leckie in his book, The Battle for Iwo Jima. At first it came as a ragged rattle of machine gun bullets, growing gradually louder and fiercer, until at last all the pent-up fury of 100 hurricanes seemed to be breaking upon the heads of the Americans. Shells screeched and crashed, every hummock spat automatic fire, and the very soil underfoot erupted with hundreds of exploding landmines. Marines walking erect crumpled and fell. Concussion lifted them and slammed them down or tore them apart. It was a massacre for the Marines, who by some miracle managed to push through off the beaches. But even here things didn't get any easier. Reinforced concrete bunkers and pillboxes were all waiting, with overlapping fields of view and connected by tunnels, creating a pocket of destruction that Marines just walked into. The Marines armed with satchel charges and grenades were out of their depth, each forcing at least one soldier to sacrifice their life, to get up close and blow up the structures. So, the United States had to come up with a plan, something that would not only catch the Japanese off guard, but one that would turn into suicide. At first, the United States used the M2 flamethrower, each with 2 tanks and a range of about 20 to 30 yards. They had a jelly-like fuel mixture inside, with a compressed gas that pushed it out. At the tip was phosphorus, which ignited the substance. But each burst only lasted for 10 seconds, after which the operator would be defenseless, aside from the M1911 sidearm carried as standard issue. But having a tank of fuel on the back wasn't exactly reassuring, meaning that all this needed to happen quickly. The operator sprinted towards the target, unleashed his fire, and then simply prayed he'd make it back safely. Even more frustrating was the fact that the flamethrowers were large, meaning Japanese troops could spot them from about 100 yards. It immediately made them priority targets, forcing Marines to lay down suppressing fire to assist these operators. This meant that, as effective as they were when within range, it was nearly impossible to get there without being shot in the process. Moreover, being captured as a flamethrower operator meant instant execution, as one Marine mentioned when his partner headed toward a cave and the flamethrower misfired. The Japanese grabbed him, pulled him inside the cave, and for the next 2 days, the only thing they could hear was screams of torture. Until it finally faded, leaving a psychological scar. So, the Marines turned to something different. One of the greatest moves on the battlefield came when the US converted the M4 Sherman tank into the M4A3R3. It had a flamethrower mounted instead of a main gun, and it also carried about 300 gallons of fuel. This was far more than the 4-gallon capacity carried by soldiers, while having additional steel that protected the operators inside. It also had a range of almost 90 yards, far more than the M2. But this came with risks of its own, as one lucky hit could turn this massive tank into a fireball, eliminating everyone inside. Nevertheless, the United States pushed on. They'd capture the island on March 26, 1945, a full 36 days after the first invasion. Yet this came at a deadly cost. There is no clear information to indicate how many Japanese soldiers lost their lives due to flamethrowers, but on the US side, the numbers were staggering. 335 operators went to the battlefield. Only 18 returned to tell their story. Their effectiveness was undeniable, but the cost made it even more deadly than U-boat operators in the German Navy. But one man who did survive was none other than Herschel Woodrow Woody Williams, a young 22-year-old corporal raised on a dairy farm in West Virginia. On February 23, 1945, he and his company, 1st Battalion, 21st Marines, were tasked with taking down a Japanese pillbox with a charge put on a pole. The men were instructed to blow it up, but as they moved closer, everyone alongside Corporal Woody tragically lost their lives. Being the only man alive, Woody didn't retreat. He continued pushing forward, pushing his flamethrower nozzle through a vent opening and blasting every single Japanese soldier inside. It didn't stop there. Woody returned 5 more times, refueled his flamethrower, and destroyed the remaining pillboxes all by himself. Meanwhile, the US raised 2 flags on Mount Suribachi, with Corporal Woody even being close enough to the volcano to witness this. He'd become the only flamethrower in the war to earn the highest award in the United States military when he was issued the Medal of Honor. Woody lived a good life, passing away in 2022 at the age of 98. Operating a flamethrower on Iwo Jima was perhaps the most deadly job in the entire war. Only 8% of those deployed made it back, almost as bad as operating a U-boat. If you want to find out why, check out this video next.